Good night, sweet prince. The R1 is dead and gone, buried, never to be seen again, if you live in the EU. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the show, and today we're doing something we haven't done in a hot minute. We're just going to go vlog. We're going to have a conversation about the EU version of the R1 and R1M going the way of the dodo, and why I think it was sort of inevitable. This one's just going to be nice and loose. We're going to have some fun out here. I'm actually currently holding up an entire group ride having this conversation. So let's quip the preamble and let's hit the road. This video is powered by Cardo. They're the best in the business when it comes to motorcycle communications, and they've been my choice since the day I got my first bike. Whether you want to listen to music while you ride or chat with your buddies, they've got options to fit any budget. Click that link down in the description below and use the code SPITE10 for 10% off your order.
Okie dokie, folks. So, I kinda had a feeling that this was coming, especially with other Yamaha-related news, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But it kinda also makes sense to me, given Yamaha's past moves. So, let's dive in with the actual news here. It's, you'll have to forgive me, I don't have the exact quote to hand, but essentially the news is Yamaha is removing the R1 and R1M from sale in Europe. And the reason why they're doing this, they've quoted specifically Euro 5 Plus as the regulation death knell that killed this motorcycle. And I'm sure a lot of folks out there are going to be like, oh, those Europeans out there, they're tightening emissions regulations, and that's what's ruining motorcycles. And you're kind of right. It's 100% accurate that the Sportster, for example, the Evo Sportster, was discontinued because I think it barely passed Euro 2. I don't remember specifically which one, but the Sportster was essentially impossible to make Euro compliant. So was the Grezzo. The Grezzo I'm on right now is not Euro compliant. It's just those emissions regulations are too tight for most air-cooled motorcycles, so that's why everything's liquid-cooled now. And as we see tightening emissions regulations, we see some bikes up displacement and yet not gain much horsepower, or slap bigger and bigger exhaust cans on there, much to the chagrin of American riders who don't have to deal with those tightening regulations. They specifically quoted Euro 5 Plus. Now, there has been some conversation both in my Discord and on Reddit and various forums that have pointed out the fact that Euro 5 Plus is not necessarily more strict than Euro 5. So the question then becomes, well, why can't it pass Euro 5 Plus? Something is different here, right? Yes. Specifically, we're dealing with the catalytic converter needs to undergo some sort of stress testing. What that is, I'm not entirely sure. But my guess is that what they don't want to do is the second part, which is a alert system that notifies the rider when the emissions control system has been tampered with or is not functioning properly. Because that's expensive. You have to run different sniffers in there that are making sure that everything works correctly, and you need to do a whole bunch of programming in the computer and put different lights on and stuff. That would be a pain in the ass. Totally guarantee that would be a gigantic pain in the butt, and I think that, more specifically than some sort of structural integrity test, is what Yamaha does not want to do. Now, a lot of people are blaming this regulation and saying, oh, well, look, it's not that hard. Why can't Yamaha do it? Honestly, I think Yamaha is using this as a straw man to throw people off the scent. I think they're wise enough to know that most riders are just going to blame Euro compliance and get mad at the European Union and then not at Yamaha. Yamaha has essentially sent the blame elsewhere to throw off the scent, because I honestly think Yamaha just ain't selling a lot of R1s and R1Ms. I really don't think they are. I think they're selling a handful, and specifically more in the United States where they're still available. But I just don't see massive leader bikes as being top sellers anymore. I think the same thing ended up happening to the Gixxer 1000, GSXR 1000. Can't remember if it's GSXR 1000R or whatever it is. Anyway, the Gixxer Thou is no longer available in Europe for very similar reasons, and honestly, I think what the problem is just people aren't buying super sports anymore. There was this massive wave in the early to late 90s and early 2000s where super sports were de rigueur. You went everywhere, you saw super sport. You went to a twisty road, super sports. Highways, you saw super sports doing big pulls, tracks. It was all super sports because there was this massive amount of popularity. And I think it was also because they were the best motorcycles available at the time. You look at other bikes that were around and they didn't have the technology that super sports did. Say, for example, the 919. The 919 is a good counterpoint to the 900RR, the 954, the CBR 1000RR that came out during the early 2000s that was just faster, with better suspension, a better frame, better handling. The 919 is a great bike, but it's based on late 90s tech versus the leader bikes, which were based on current year technology. Now, I'm not saying that's not true anymore. In fact, the leader bikes are still pushing the boundaries of motorcycling technology because they're still racing them. But the reality is other bikes around leader bikes have gotten so good that people can have super sport and leader bike performance without the back pain or the knee pain or being scrooged up into a ball like this. They don't have to deal with the comfort sacrifices that you have to make to justify owning a super sport. Give you an idea, I'm on a group ride right now with, I think there's 8 or 9 guys on this group ride. 2 of them are riding what I would consider super sports, and one of them's an RS660. That RS660, you could get away with calling it a super sport, but it's also kind of not. The other one is a Ducati, and that one, you know, it's a big V-twin. The RS660 parallel twin. You look at those power plants and the way they deliver power, it's just a little bit more appropriate for street riding. I find it hysterical that I'm making the case for a Ducati on the street, a Panigale no less. But it does make more sense to me to run a Panigale than it does to run a R1 because you're dealing with such peaky power on the inline 4, and that's what it's designed to do. And some people love that. And if the R1 and inline 4 soundtrack is your thing, there is no substitute, and I apologize because this sucks, man. It sucks when the thing that you love gets canceled. Welcome to the club. So many bikes that I love have gotten the axe, and some of them before they even hit the showroom floor. Looking at you, Harley, and your Bronx. But you got to remember that in EU, and I'm speaking specifically to my American audience here, in the EU and Europe and, you know, Southeast Asia and everywhere that bikes are popular, motorcycles in those parts of the world, in almost every part of the world except here, bikes are used a lot more for commuting. And could you imagine commuting on an R1 every single day? Never getting out of first gear and dealing with those tight, twisty European roads where you can't even get it to 90 miles an hour? it would suck riding that. And you'd have a lot more fun on something like an R7, which is half the price, I think. I think it's half the price. And this is where I hear those guys be like, oh, spite off. The R7 is no substitute for the R6, and whatever the R9 is going to be is no substitute for the R1. And I hear you. I absolutely hear you. A lot of people have been waiting for the R9 forever because they think that the R9 is going to be their new 600 competitor. When you look at the power band of the MT-09, it's a little bit closer to something like a 600 than a 1000. And the MT-07 motor putting down a wee, like, what is that, 80 horsepower? That would have been a poor substitute for an R6. So in every way, these new Yamahas are less effective than the bike that they are theoretically supposed to replace, despite having similar-ish displacement. But you can't say that the MT-09 motor makes less sense for the street than the R1 motor. You know what I mean? It's a more appropriate kind of power for the daily rider. And usually those bikes, they come with slightly more relaxed ergonomics, which allow for just more comfort in general. I mean, look at me right now. I'm riding my Grezzo and not my CBR 600 F4i. I'm not riding my super sport styled motorcycle. I'm riding something that's more comfortable because I'm doing a long, twisty road ride. And this bike is as good on the side of the tire for the most part. It's heavier. You know, it doesn't dip in as good, and because it's heavier, the brakes aren't as efficient. But at the speeds I'm going, this thing is as good as my CBR. And this is where I'm going to pass it off to you guys. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about Yamaha getting rid of the R1 and R1M in Europe. Do you think that it is just emissions regulations? Do you think that Yamaha is looking at business stats that say, yeah, it doesn't make sense to sell this motorcycle. Let's just make the EU government our straw man and have everybody burn them down. That's probably as conspiratorial as I've gotten on the channel, but honestly, I could see that being the case because the EU's emissions regulations have been a boogeyman for so long. So let me know your thoughts down below, and if you're a R1 owner or a Super Sport owner, let me know if you're bummed about this or if you kind of saw the writing on the wall. I think that both can be true. If you want my opinion on it here at the end, I'm bummed that the R1 is gone. I really am, because it's one less option for Euro squids. You know, now you can't have that juicy inline 4 crossplane. You know, you got to wait for Kawasaki to do it, because you know Kawasaki's yeah, you're going to have to wait for Kawasaki, because Kawasaki's never going to change their bikes. They're never going to get rid of them anyway. And, you know, they still seem, for all their faults and foibles, they seem like they actually really just love riding. Honda ain't going to change shit. If you're waiting for Honda to change, the heat death of the universe will come first. And on that note, guys, I'm going to call it a day. Catch you in the next one. See you later.